Hi, Misha here, and it's time for another AK video. But what to do? I don't really have any new AKs, and to be fair, there aren't any really cool new ones aside from some kit builds on the market and, price. But, I do have a little 545 left. So, pretty kind of careful with how I spend it. But as we were kind of inaugurating the cabin, that seemed like a good time to go through a few boxes. And not quite 2 years ago, I let Fox shoot this gun with this here mag. My Arsenal SLR105A1. This happens to have a Mishaco mag in it. Wood furniture. That was his very first time with a 545x39 cartridge. 7 and 6 with the military designation. And he seemed to really like it. Take a look. Fox's very first rounds of 545 through anything. The 105 was the first 545 Arsenal sold in America, limited numbers, and their first stamped gun. We've talked a lot about it. It's a good old gun, back when Arsenal was really making the name for themselves. But the one you probably are more familiar with, and the one that's honestly getting a lot of attention the last couple of years, ever since you can't have them. Well, you can, but they haven't been imported because no one bought them. It's a story. The Arsenal SLR104FR. And many will ask me, what's the difference? Now, I could point out some minor things like the accessory lug and things like that, but the truth is, the stock. 105 was a fixed rear trend gun. 104 has the original AK74 side folder with the 4.5 hinge pin versus the later Russian 5.5. And I've had this one Tula kind of shiny mag for years, but a month or two ago, a customer traded in, let's see which pouch to put it in, a couple more Tula mags. Just enough to finish out a pretty standard pouch. They're in good shape. A little bit of, honest wear on these. And so, between just, wanting to have something special for the cabin, and since Fox only had shot a 545 once before, I figured, well, let's go out and test both of these mags. I have no doubt they'll run perfectly fine, perfectly good, but why not try them out? And let him shoot the side folding version and see what he thinks vis-a-vis the original Woodstock version. But keep in mind, this ammo I'm pretty careful about using. It's limited supply ever since recent events. And with that also in mind, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. At the very least, we greatly appreciate it. We need to. And if you can help out on Patreon, it all goes to ammo and sometimes gas and, cleaning stuff. It's starting to kind of drizzle out here, so, cleaning stuff to keep the guns in good working order. But yeah, with that, let's put a mag or so through a gun I've had about a decade. Fox with the 104FR.
Goodness gracious.
That precious 545 ammo.
What a beauty.
Like the 105, the 104. It's a good solid gun. And this stock was a very ingenious kind of solution. And I have this one dressed up in Russian furniture as well, but that's okay for a Bulgarian gun with Russian furniture, both of these. But before we get into that, let's see what Fox thought about it. So you've never actually shot that one before? But
No.
Yeah.
Man, what can you say? It's like shooting a 22, except really, really fast. That's just such a fun round. It's a shame that you can't spend 1,000 rounds a day, but man.
Yeah. Not to go too much into the history, but I can't help myself. This one here, the 105, specifically, this is the A1 version. They had 4 basic versions they brought over. This was at the tail end of 2004, right after the sunset of the assault weapons ban, the federal ban from 94 to 2004. And they were sold through 2005 and maybe just a little bit into 2006. The basic version was just pretty much as imported, with essentially a blank, neutered front sight. The A1, they replaced the neutered FSB with one with a bayonet lug and 24mm threads. This is the slab side version, which I like because it's a standard AK74 looking gun. But there was also the 105R, which had a standard Warsaw packed Comblock side rail. And of course, you could combine the two, having an A1R or RA1. I forget the thing where you would have the front sight base and side rail. That was kind of what was neat about the 74 style, was just replacing the front sight. You would get threads and a bayonet lug, whereas with, say, an AKM, you would have to replace the gas block or re-weld it like they do on the Wasser, and then thread the barrel or something else. So quick and easy deal right as the ban came off, and kind of a piece of history there. Now, when these shipped, originally they had just, I think it was US made, it might have been Bulgarian, but I'm pretty sure it was US made black polymer furniture. Good stuff, but not really appropriate for this style of gun. And for years there were rumors that some parts that Arsenal used in these were new old stock, unissued, virgin from Tula, which closed around 1992, and it said that they transferred some of their leftover parts for the AK74 and AKS74 U-line to Bulgaria Arsenal, because even though they made 5 million AK74s, give or take, it just wasn't as popular as the AKM because of its cartridge. Just as the AKM and the AK-47 before it was designed around the 760 by 39 round, this was designed around the 545 by 39 round. But it did not catch on. In fact, really the only major users were the Soviet Union, later Russia, of course, other subsequent nations that would come apart after the breakup, like Ukraine and Belarus. East Germany was another major user, and Bulgaria. Poland and Romania would adopt a version of the cartridge, but not a version of the AK-74. Rather, they would go their own direction. So really, AK-74s were only licensed, produced officially East Germany and Bulgaria outside of Russia. Of course, a few other nations obtained complete guns, and these were built in Russia at Izhmash, and Tula. Although Tula seemed to focus more on the crinks, especially later on, leaving the majority of production to Izhmash. But like I said, it was designed around a cartridge. And it shows. Russia really was interested in the 222 Special, which would become 223 Remington, later 5.56 NATO. And as early as 1960, they had some examples that tear apart. And by the mid-60s, they were necking down their 7.62-39 casings to hold the 22 caliber bullet. And really by 1967, they had hit upon the 5.45 round. It was always a bimetal. Sometimes they would originally use more mild steel, later harder, and then lead, and then little pocket. And they would continue to kind of perfect it. In fact, the 7.6 cartridge itself wasn't officially adopted until 1974, but really by 1968, 1970, it was done. In fact, half a dozen companies would make the cartridges en masse in Russia for decades, some to this very day. But once they kind of had the cartridge nailed down, they opened up trials in 1966. The earliest field testing was 1968, and by 1970, it was down to a Kalashnikov design and a Konstantin design, the SA006 and the A3. And as, of course, you know, the AK1 with the very, very first production guns in 1973. This is kind of a pre-production run through 75 that looked a lot like an AKM, frankly. The first, what we would think of as the AK74s would appear around late 75, early 76, and about a 250,000 guns built in the earliest. They still had 45-degree gas blocks. They still had a rubber butt plate. The first actual 74 style guns were around 1978. They got rid of the rubber butt plate. We have the 45-degree, and we have the early types of brakes. They were always a single piece early on. This is the zigzag style. This is actually an East German on this particular one. These appeared around 78, 79, and were kind of the first ones exported and widely used. And they would originally use wood furniture, again, early on AKM style. Later on, more specific with the ribbed butt plate, the lightning cuts, the vent grooves. There's all kinds of little details we can talk about. And of course, these AG4 material, 2 halves put together mags, commonly called Bakelite, were actually taken from the 7.62x39. They were introduced in 1968, but shrunk down and carried over for this guy. And the bayonet would also be carried over. The original AKM bayonet, adopted in 1959, would not fit this because of its bulbous butt. But around 1965-66, the kind of second pattern AKM bayonet would come about with the steel butt. And so it would more or less fit the 74 without issue. So the second generation of AKM would also be the first generation of 74 bayonets when they were adopted. And you do have a bit of a longer reach because of the muzzle brake, and they put a lot of effort into this brake to help tame recoil and automatic, and also really just improve accuracy as best they could, because the Kalashnikov wasn't the most accurate of the trials. The Konstantin design was more so, but this was highly parts compatible with the AKM, and soldiers were already very familiar with it, and it was, you know, good enough. And of course, once the war in Afghanistan ramped up, 1979, 1980, Russia would just start producing these in the millions. Already by 1980, you're at about 2 million. And they would start exporting them. Like I said, East Germany would start building them. And Bulgaria would get interested in the early 80s. And we would see some more changes, which would lead kind of to this pattern here. Now my turn. So the AKS-74, the side-folding version, was developed and introduced right alongside the AK-74. They had had a lot of experience with the AKMS, and they knew that a folding stock was becoming more and more important as mechanization, be it in vehicles or helicopters, Heinz, was there. But the AKMS had some issues, the underfolding version. They look cool, don't get me wrong, but they actually are heavier than the fixed stock version, and they bulge out on the sides when they fold. They're a little wiggly wobbly, cheek weld's not great, and they're pretty parts intensive to produce. There's a lot of bits and bobs. So when they went to this style, also used on, of course, the AKS-74, the crank, they wanted to go simple but better, and they did. Now you do need this little latch up here that requires a modified trunnion. Then you get back here and you do have a modified rear, different at an angle, but then you get to the stock And this is just punched out steel that's kind of folded and spot welded together. Simple, dependable. And the way the latch works, it's very sturdy. In fact, they built in wear. If you notice on a lot of these, this side of the latch, even when it's in, sticks out. That's not a bug, it's a feature. If you have one of these where the latch is flush or in, it's actually overly worn, or at least too overly fitted. The idea was, as the metal wears and eventually wears away, this can slide in a little bit further and keep tension tight. I mean, I've had this gun a decade, like I said, and that stock is still sturdy. And this may not be the most comfy cheek weld, it's just metal, but because of this muzzle brake working so well with the small caliber high velocity cartridge, it doesn't knock your teeth around. It really doesn't. It's a very pleasant shooting experience, unlike a lot of AKMSs, frankly. And whereas the AKMS folding stock added weight, this actually subtracts it, which is cool. This gun here is about 6 3/4, 7 pounds, depending on the exact furniture, unloaded. By the way, it's 37 inches long. The muzzle brake makes it slightly longer than an AKM. This one, again, depending on furniture, is about 6.5 pounds, maybe 6 3/4. So you do save about a quarter pound, which to anyone in the military, you know that matters. By the way, it's also 37 extended, and if you fold the stock, you save about 10 inches down to just over 27. So not bad, just a little over 2 feet. That's what the muzzle device installed. If you were to unscrew it, you'd go down to about 26 or 25 inches. Now that wood furniture, it was hanging in there. But in the early 80s, polymer was all the thing. So they started experimenting with what we know today as plum. This appears around 83 in experimental form, 84 earliest production, and 85, 86 it starts to make its way into the field. And it's kind of funny. They would produce new guns with it for sure, but also older guns, as parts would break, as furniture would break, especially in Afghanistan like this, they would replace it with polymer. So you can actually see pictures from Afghanistan with polymer handguards and a wood stock, or vice versa. I mean, aesthetics, it's Russia, who cares? This does save weight, it's more durable, it's got the heat shield. Now I have to say, Bulgaria never made plum, but they sure used it. If you see plum on a Bulgarian gun, it's because it was Russian furniture, and that's not uncommon. Like I said, around 81, 82, Bulgaria became interested in this rifle, and by 83 they purchased some, obtained some from Russia, and by 84 they were starting to set up production at Arsenal, which had been making the AK-47 Type 3, the milled, not the AKM, but they were going straight from the milled gun to the 74 stamped. And the first guns were assembled in Bulgaria using Russian parts, and that would actually continue on for quite a while. In fact, it would not be until at least 86 that the first more or less all Bulgarian guns would appear, although Russian furniture like this appeared throughout the late 80s. Bulgarian guns tended to have their Bulgarian blonde wood handguard and their what I call happy dog pinkish reddish pistol grip made out of that very odd material. So yeah, Russian parts appear for quite some time. That's why I put Russian furniture and an Izhevsk buttstock on this. You can tell Tula from Izhevsk based on the way it's rolled and the butt plate. This is smooth. Bulgaria actually did a version of this stock that's a hybrid of Tula and Izhevsk, but I digress. Also, the muzzle device. I pointed out earlier about the zigzag single piece on this used by East Germany, Bulgaria early on, and Russia. But in the 80s, they went to the earlier two-piece design. The Russian version had more of a gentle step, but Bulgaria, they went a little cheaper, and they just did a sharp step, two-piece, half-moon style, which, as far as I know, they still make today. By the way, the muzzle devices are chrome plated inside for easier cleaning. And they have these wonderful asymmetric ports in this chamber here. These brakes, and it even has these angled gas deflection, they put a lot of thought into this brake. And so I have this gun set up in a late 70s, early 80s style. And this gun here is set up in a mid to late 80s style, which is about the time that Bulgaria was starting up production, so it seems fitting. And like I said, these are rumored to have had quite a few Russian parts in them for their production run. And whereas the 104FRs, not as much, but some people have reported a Russian trunnion or two, so take that as you will. And there's also the bayonet situation. So, question, do you like the wood look like you shot last year, or do you like that plum look?
Dude, I hate to say it, but it's 50-50. I don't like the quality of this plastic. I know it's surplus, it's military, whatever. Yep. The wood looks better. Dude, it's 50-50. It's like asking if I like vanilla better or chocolate ice cream better. Just,
well, the clear answer is peanut butter.
Bingo.
So they were using just the late style AKM, but around 1983-84, work began in Russia on an updated bayonet, and this was put into production around 1986. And there were 3 or 4 versions before they kind of settled on it here. And it is a different design. In fact, the blade itself is nearly ½ an inch longer. It's a very different styling. Back to the single piece grip with things, and you notice there's no hand strap, but there's finger grooves. Now, early on, these would have had the same kind of plum colored, but soon they would go to black. And notice it has the tin. Bulgaria is the only nation to officially produce this style of bayonet outside of the Soviet Union and Russia. And like I said, they never did plum, so theirs will be the black style. They even did a version of this in a small run, meant to fit the older milled AK-47. It's kind of funny looking, but it's a cool bayonet. Russian ones are very spendy in America, and even the Bulgarian ones aren't like super easy to find, but they are high quality. I picked this one up off of K-Bar about 20 some odd years ago. Yeah, it's just more of a modern style. And of course, these are all more or less backwards compatible with the AKM. But everything's pretty legit, including that there rooster. Yeah, these muzzle brakes, they're old, but they're good. And even though it's a metal light stock,
you would never know it.
Yeah, you just don't really notice it. But the one thing I've always noticed about 545, it heats up very quick, but it also cools off pretty quick. It gets toasty though.
Why is that?
It's a high velocity round, and it's a relatively thin barrel, so it's coming out with some authority. So the 2 mags, the new ones worked fine. Appreciate the gentleman who traded them in. Here's one style of pouch with the 2 pockets, 3 cell. And here's a later Russian one from the 80s. Picked a few of these up from Numeric years ago. Only has the 1 pocket here. But really the pouch you see a lot is this 4 cell. First started off with the AKM, but carried over and really made famous by the 74. This one has some Bulgarian mags in it. I didn't ask JRO which colors. They have the Circle 10. There's also a Circle 21s. It holds the stripper clip and stripper clip guide. It's got a big old generous pocket. And Bulgaria not only made black mags, they also made brown, chocolate, brick, dark brick, and those are just the military. Now you get to the civilians, yeah, they finally did do plums in the 20th 21st century and they did green. But if you see some interesting colors, one way or the other, brown, bricky color, that's Bulgarian most likely. And if you see plum, that's Russian. And of course, if you see black, that could be either one, so you need to check the stampings. East Germany only made Bakelite, and Romania, even though they had their own gun, made steel. Poland also made steel, and they also made a black polymer very similar to Bulgaria and Russia, but again, different markings. Collecting mags is fun, at least if you don't have to pay out the nose for them. That's why I was having a pouch full of the Tula Star plums I thought was neat. And wanted to let Fox try this gun again, because he enjoyed this one here quite a bit back at the end of 2022. And I understand why he still prefers the wood. It does have a more classic look. The cheap weld is still a little better. It's got a little bit, more weight to it, better balance. And I'm going to be honest. The 104FR is a good gun. But when they did the 105s back in the day, there's just something slightly smoother about the bolt throw, slightly better about the trigger. Keep in mind, US trigger, so, as you will. Everything's just a little nicer, even the paint finish. These are both imports. But that's not the dog on this one. And a lot more of these came in. The 105 fixed stalker, you only had a few hundred. I've seen all kinds of different numbers, but it's anywhere from 500 to 2,000. And the confusion is when people read 500, they don't know if it means of each of the 4 variants or together. I've seen enough of them. I think it's probably closer to 2,000, but whatever. The 104FR, these started coming in 2013, and again, don't know how many. Arsenal's always tight-lipped about numbers, but more. But not a huge number, guys. If I had to just guesstimate, total guesstimate, 10,000. And the reason that more did not come in wasn't because they couldn't get more out of Bulgaria. They just didn't sell that well. And that's the fate of all 545 guns. The SAR2, the Wasser2, even some of the Vepers and Segas in 545. The collectors and weird people like myself will buy the 545, but once we're satiated, it never really penetrated the market in America like 223, 556, or even 7.62 by 39. And I get that. Ballistics and all that argument aside, it's a foreign cartridge, and as I said at the beginning of the video, whereas 7.62-39 was adopted and used by hundreds of nations around the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, 545 just wasn't. Part of it was the Soviet Union fell pretty quick, within a decade of it going into widespread production. But another point is 556 was dominating the world, and the truth is the two cartridges are neck and neck. One might argue one has a slight advantage over the other, but not enough to matter logistically. And since Russia lost the Cold War, we'll just say, for back of anything else, their influence just didn't spread like the US, the West, and all that. So it is a cartridge relegated to collectability more than practicality, and thus the 104s, after initially good sales, they really petered out, so much so that by 2015, Black Friday, they were retailing these quite cheap, if I'm being honest. $1,000 new. Not dealer cost, but person cost. Of course, that was then. When they finally sold out of that batch, I think the lowest, or the most recent trending data I've ever seen was 2014. You can easily tell, based on the dating system, beginning in 1960. So, they just didn't sell so well, despite everything. And that was that. Times went on. Of course, these days, people really want them. I understand the want. I just don't necessarily understand some of the prices that they're seemingly going for on Gunbroker. Yeah, these Arsenals, I see why people like them and want them, but I don't know about those modern prices, folks. I really don't. But, you know, value, it's in the eye of the beholder. But, as I said already, you know, mileage may vary. But it's a gun that I like to get out, either one of them, from time to time. But unfortunately, the ammo will always be kind of hard to get. But I'm also not keen to get rid of them because at the end of the day, this is the only true AK74 pattern fixed stock rifle to ever be imported. Even the Segas, even the Vepers, not a true original 74 stock. And this is the only true AKS74. We've never had East German imports, and the Romanian SARs, while amazing, cool guns and good value for a long time, they're their own thing. They're based on their PA86. But like I said earlier, really Bulgaria was the only nation to build this outside of the Soviet Union, so anyone else would just be copying it. For example, the Chinese Type 88 was a pretty mediocre copy, if I'm being straight with you. They took an AKM and half-assed it. And then there's the North Korean, which is a thing in and of itself. But yeah, took this out. It's kind of cool to let 545 stretch his legs at the cabin. And both are very solid guns. If you find one of these in a pawn shop for a good price, absolutely pick it up. There's no issues with either one. But I've heard people paying $3,000, $4,000. I personally wouldn't do that. But I'm not telling you what to do. Just my opinion. This is a good gun, but it's not that to me. But if it's to you and you've got the money, go for it. It's not going to break on you. There's no parts to worry about breaking. They're standard guns, and they sold them both with the polymer stock and the metal, so and it's easy to switch them out. Just one pin. You don't have to even disassemble the gun except get the top cover off. And if you do get a 105, I definitely recommend taking the black furniture off and putting either plum or wood on. This gun is like, if I had to sell all but 3 or 4 of my AKs, this would be one that I would still keep because it's iconic. And when I was a kid and even getting into guns as a young adult, you could not get a gun like this as an import. You had to do a parts kit build, and even those didn't start appearing on the market till at least 2005. So cool beans. But I know folks like AK stuff around here, so why not revisit something we don't always get out to the range? I got a question for you. What's one of your guns that you really enjoy, but you just never get out and shoot enough for whatever reason? Let's have a discussion in the comments below. And if you could, check out some of the older videos on the AK74 and things we've done in the past and the original video on this. Like you can, like, share, and subscribe. Like to help support us as we start doing more stuff at the cabin. Check out the link to Patreon. With that, also on behalf of Fox, we will catch you very soon next time.